This is an interesting topic because I want to talk about it from different levels. First, from the level of God's consciousness, then from the level of soul consciousness, and then from the level of the soul identified with the body and the personality, which is the ego's consciousness. And so doing God's will, first of all, from God's standpoint, a God's eye view of what this subject is. It's one of the mysteries from us who are caught in ego to try to project our mind into God's mind and say, why do you want to create this creation in the first place with all the noise and traffic and hubbub and so on? The way Swamiji answered that was a very interesting answer. God's consciousness is still, and it's made up of Satchitananda, awareness, consciousness, and bliss. And so that blissful aspect of God's consciousness, Swami said, one of the qualities of bliss, one of the qualities of joy, is that it innately wants to share itself. And so if there's just one pure consciousness, how is there the ability to share that bliss? It's just for God alone, in a sense. And so in order to, one could say, I guess, to satisfy that desireless desire, God creates what appears to be multiplicity. Appears to be a creation with billions of galaxies and trillions of stars and who knows how many little entities. We only know of this one tiny little marble floating in the middle of the space, which is Earth. But from God's vastness, I saw one time a little video that showed from the Hubble telescope, they took the darkest part of the sky that they could find, and they focused in on a postage stamp size of that darkest sky, and then they zoomed in on that. And there were thousands, not just of stars, of galaxies in that tiny little fragment of space. And this is just on the physical plane. On the physical plane, Sri Yukteswar said, is like a little gondola floating under the big hot air balloon of the astral plane. And the astral plane is tiny in relationship to the causal plane, and all of those planes are not even a fraction of God's consciousness. I read an interesting statement 2 days ago. And it said, imagine a mountain that is a mile high and a mile wide and a mile deep. And imagine that once every 1,000 years, a bird comes and sharpens its beak on that mountain. When that mountain is finally worn away, that will be one day of eternity. And so God's consciousness is eternity. So when he looks down on us, one could imagine that from that vast consciousness, why would he care about your life and my life? And, you know, in all that vastness, aren't we lost? Someone asked Master that question. And Master said, your concept of God's consciousness of infinity is too narrow. Because he's not only infinitely large, he's infinitely small. And so he's just as much in each one of us as he is in the whole galaxy, in the whole creation. And so he's everywhere. He permeates everything. Permeates. And so from his standpoint, from God's standpoint, he's just expressing joy. And there's neither good nor bad nor evil nor saintliness or up or down. It's all just an expression of his consciousness. But that innate joy that wants to share itself also wants to recombine with, one could call it, the ocean of joy from which it sprang. And so essentially Sanatana Dharma, the essence of Sanatana Dharma, as Swamiji talked about it, is that we all come from God's consciousness. We all come from that joy. And everything in creation longs to return back into unity with that joyful spirit again. And so that outward movement and that movement back, one could almost call that the primordial vibration of creation, the movement out and the movement back to God. So from the standpoint of this soul, now, just as God creates thousands, millions, billions and billions of galaxies and trillions of stars, he creates trillions and trillions of souls. Again, if we used an expression of multiplicity like that mountain which the bird wore down, think of it this way in terms of souls, that in a sip of water that you take, there are approximately as many molecules as there are grains of sand on every beach in the world. So that smallness as you begin to come down into all of that. So, and that's just one sip of water. Your body is made up of water. Our bodies are like a galaxy in and of themselves. So, and God inhabits the tiny aspect as much as the vast aspect. And so God is infinitely small as well as infinitely great. He's infinitely in us as well as infinitely in everything. And mostly, he's beyond all creation. And so he creates multiplicities of souls. Probably trillions upon, you couldn't count them with the mere numbers that we work with. Trillions and trillions of souls. And each one of those souls has implanted in it two aspects. One, the impulse to go out, and the other, the impulse to come back. And so each of us is drawn in two directions. One is we want to go out, and we want to come back. Master said that everyone, one could say everything, is motivated by one desire. The desire to be happy and the desire to avoid pain. And so that spreading out, why do we spread out? Because as long as we're in a body, as long as we have senses, we think that the body and the senses and the personality is going to become happy if we achieve some goal outside of ourselves. And so we reach out for it. And then God allows us, it isn't like he's manipulating it. He's set up kind of universal laws. And so the universal law of happiness, if we seek something long enough, we will achieve it. And that it's really more the seeking that is the interesting part than the achieving. Because once we achieve, then we realize that doesn't give us happiness. Nothing outside gives us happiness. So we may, for many, many lifetimes, seek to become wealthy. And then finally we achieve wealth. And we're disappointed. And so there's this push-pull. And so from the soul's standpoint, it's like the soul is dreaming, and dreaming the dream of life. You know, at night when we dream, one of the aspects is that in the dream there is a character that seems to be us, and all the other characters and scene of the dream seems to be not us. And so that nightly dream that we have, Master said that we dream at night spiritually to see how God creates this world. And so that nightly dream that we have, the character in that is usually seeking something that seems like it's going to make him happy or her happy, and trying to avoid, if there's a nightmare, we're trying to avoid that which seems frightening or seems going to be able to give us pain. And as long as we're in the dreaming state, all of that seems not only real, but we're totally engrossed in that. So the soul is engrossed in the drama of this life. Now, from God's standpoint, what God wants of the soul is simply that the soul wake up from the dreaming state. He doesn't care very much whether the dream is pleasant or unpleasant to the soul. In fact, when we're dreaming at night, sometimes an unpleasant dream makes us want to wake up faster than a pleasant one. Because a pleasant dream, let's continue this. Let's see if we can dream longer. So when we're trying to achieve something or we do achieve something that seems pleasurable, that actually can retard our waking up. And so does God, thinking of the construction, there was one man who was the manager and another man who was laying stone. From a worldly standpoint, people will think, I want to be the manager. I don't want to just be the worker. The manager, he has, not at Ananda, but in the world, he would get a higher wage, he would have more status, all of that. And so people want to achieve that because they think it will give them happiness. And they want to move away from just being the worker because they think, that's not as good, not as much money, not as much status, harder work, and so on. So one seems pleasure and one seems pain. But from God's standpoint, it's all just a dream. And he wants us just to wake up from the dream. And so sometimes for the life of the devotee, so coming back now, I talked a little about God's viewpoint. The soul's viewpoint is that the soul is dreaming. What about the character in the dream, the ego, from the ego standpoint? The ego in God's dream has free will. Now, if you have too much pleasure, if you're caught in a dream that is too pleasant, you can't easily wake up from that because it's too mesmerizing, isn't it? If you have something that's too painful, it'll scare you and you'll wake up. And so God creates this world in just such a balance that it's for each of us just a balance of 50-50. And from that exact balance point, then we have some degree of free will, meaning, do I want to wake from this dream or do I not want to wake from this dream? And so from our standpoint, from the ego standpoint, really the only choice, the only free will we really have is, do we want to wake up or do we not want to wake up? Do you love God or do you not love God? That's what many of the masters said. Really, that's the only free choice. So in this term, do we want to wake from that or do we not want to wake from that? So from our standpoint, from the ego standpoint, we ask the question, God, do you want me to be the foreman? Yes, I think you do want me to be the foreman. I think you do because you probably really want me to have more money, don't you, God? And does God care? No, he's not interested in that. Swami said, quoted Master as saying that the great avatars, the saints, don't come to clean up the mud puddle. They come to clean up, to get us out of the mud puddle. So they don't care too much about the petty desires. They just want us to wake from those petty desires and focus on the desire to wake up in Him. And so into that dream, they send awakened souls, and those awakened souls put out a soul call. Again, we have free will, but some of us respond to that soul call. So there'll be, out there in the city of Pune, there'll be thousands and thousands of posters. And some of them will give the call to come to a movie, and some political, and a few of those will give a call to come to the program on Sunday morning, a spiritual lecture. And so a person walking through the city sees all of those posters, and they have, if they want God, then they will notice that poster that says, here's a spiritual talk on how to wake up. So our job, really, our use of free will, attuning our will to God's will, is to listen to the call of the great masters, practice those techniques that they say will bring us into a state of wakefulness, and most of all, to love God.